Did you know that during World War II, the most important American secret weapon was not a bomb or a plane? So it was a language, an ancient unwritten language spoken by a people who had been pushed to the margins of American society. The US military was desperate. Their codes were being broken almost as fast as they could create them. Every move they made in the Pacific was being anticipated by the enemy. They needed something new, something completely different. What they found was the Navajo language, or Dain-Bazad. It had no alphabet, its grammar was incredibly complex, and it was spoken by only a few thousand people in the world. A small group of young Navajo men, some as young as 15, were recruited into the Marine Corps to turn their mother tongue into an unbreakable code. Did it work? In the critical battle for Iwo Jima, 6 Navajo code talkers sent and received over 800 messages in 48 hours without a single mistake. Their commanding officer later said that without the Navajo code, the Marines would never have taken the island. So how did a group of young men and their ancient language truly change the course of a global conflict? What made their contribution so pivotal that it was kept a secret for decades after the war ended? Number 15. How did one man's childhood memory spark an unbreakable code? It all started with a problem. In early 1942, the United States Marine Corps was facing a communications crisis in the Pacific. Their codes were slow and insecure. The standard practice involved using cryptographic machines, which were bulky, required time to set up, and could be captured. More importantly, enemy intelligence was exceptionally skilled at breaking complex ciphers. Every coded message sent was a race against time, a gamble that a critical order would be executed before the enemy could decipher it. They needed a code that was fast, accurate, and above all, unbreakable. The solution came from a place no one in the military high command would have ever looked. It came from the memory of a man named Philip Johnston. Johnston was not Navajo. He was the son of a Protestant missionary who had spent most of his childhood on the Navajo Nation. He grew up playing with Navajo children, learning their language and their customs. He was one of a handful of non-Navajo people in the world who could speak the language fluently. As an adult, Johnston became an engineer for the city of Los Angeles. In February 1942, he read a newspaper article about the military's struggle to find a new code. The article mentioned an army unit in Louisiana that was using Native American soldiers for secure communications and training exercises. This sparked an idea rooted in his childhood. Johnston knew firsthand the immense complexity of the Navajo language. It was unwritten, its syntax and tonal qualities were unlike any European or Asian language. A single verb could be modified in hundreds of ways depending on the subject, object, and context. He believed it was the perfect foundation for an unbreakable code. He took his idea to the Marine Corps. On February 27, 1942, he arrived at Camp Elliott in San Diego to meet with Lieutenant Colonel James E. Jones. The initial reception was skeptical. The military was a world of rigid systems and established protocols. The idea of using an unwritten, indigenous language as a primary battlefield code seemed strange, almost amateurish. But Johnson was persistent. He explained the unique structure of Dain-Bazad. He argued that its complexity was its greatest strength. The enemy could have the best cryptographers in the world, but they could not break a code based on a language they had likely never even heard of, let alone studied. Lieutenant Colonel Jones was intrigued enough to give Johnston a chance. He agreed to a demonstration. Johnston was to prove his concept was viable under simulated combat conditions. He quickly found 4 Navajo men living in the Los Angeles area and brought them back to the base. The test was set for February 28, 1942. 2 of the Navajo men were placed in a room with a field telephone. They were given a typical military message to transmit. In another room, some distance away, the other 2 Navajo men waited to receive it. The message was sent and received in the Navajo language. Then it was translated back into English. The entire process took seconds. For comparison, a message of similar length using the standard cryptographic machines of the day could take up to 30 minutes to encode, transmit, and decode. The demonstration was a stunning success. The speed and accuracy were undeniable. Based on this proof of concept, Major General Clayton B. Vogel, the commanding general of the Amphibious Corps, Pacific Fleet, wrote a letter to the Commandant of the Marine Corps on March 6, 1942. He recommended the recruitment of 200 Navajo men for this specific purpose. The idea, born from a civilian's childhood memory, was now officially a military project. In May 1942, the Marine Corps recruited the first 29 Navajo men. This group, later known as the Original 29, was tasked with the immense challenge of creating the code itself. They had to develop a vocabulary for modern military terms that did not exist in their language and devise a system for spelling out names and places. Philip Johnston, though a civilian, stayed on as a key advisor in the early stages of the program, helping to facilitate the training and administration. His unique position as a bridge between two vastly different cultures was instrumental. The code that would go on to save countless lives and influence major battles was not the product of a government think tank or a team of cryptographers. It was the direct result of one man's respect for a culture and a language he had learned as a child. What if Johnston had simply skipped the newspaper that day? How many other brilliant, unconventional solutions to critical problems are hidden in the life experiences of ordinary people, waiting for a chance to be heard? What would have happened to the war in the Pacific if the Marines had dismissed Johnston's idea as too outlandish to even test? Number 14. Could a message be sent faster than the enemy could react? In warfare, time is not just a measure of duration, it is a weapon. The side that can communicate and react faster has a decisive advantage. Before the Navajo code talkers, American communications in the Pacific were dangerously slow. The primary method involved using machines like the M209 cipher machine. An officer would write a message. A communication specialist would then have to type that message into the machine to encrypt it, letter by letter. This produced a string of scrambled characters. That scrambled message was then transmitted via radio. On the receiving end, another specialist had to type the scrambled message into their own M209 to decrypt it. The whole process, from writing the original message to having a readable version on the other end could take anywhere from 30 minutes to, several hours. This time lag was a critical vulnerability. A battlefield situation can change in minutes. An order to attack a specific position might be useless if it arrives an hour late. A warning about an impending enemy maneuver is of no value if the enemy has already completed it. The enemy knew this. They focused their intelligence efforts not just on breaking the codes, but also on analyzing radio traffic patterns. The sheer volume and time it took to send encrypted messages gave them valuable information and, crucially, time to prepare or react. The Navajo code completely shattered this dynamic. A Navajo code talker did not need a machine. He did not need a code book, which could be lost or captured. The code was in his head. A commander could stand next to a code talker and give him an order, for example, requesting artillery fire on enemy pillbox at coordinates XY. The code talker would translate this into Navajo in real time, speaking the words into his radio handset. On the other end, another code talker would hear the Navajo words and translate them back into English for his commander. The process was as fast as a normal phone call. According to testimonies from the code talkers themselves and historical records, a message that took a machine 30 minutes to process could be translated, transmitted, and understood by the Navajo in about 20 seconds. This wasn't just an improvement, it was a revolution in battlefield communication. Think about what that speed meant in practice. It meant artillery strikes could be called in with pinpoint accuracy on moving targets. It meant reinforcements could be requested and deployed to a collapsing flank before it was too late. It meant that multiple units, infantry on the ground, ships providing naval, gunfire, and planes providing air support, could be coordinated in a seamless real-time ballet of combined arms. The historical accounts are filled with examples. During the Bougainville campaign in late 1943, Marine divisions relied heavily on the code talkers to coordinate their movements through the dense jungle. Their orders could be updated minute by minute as the situation changed. One of the most detailed accounts of their speed comes from the 1st Marine Division's official report on the Peleliu operation. The report, declassified years later, explicitly praised the Navajo communicators for the speed and accuracy with which they handled traffic. It noted that their work was essential in coordinating the difficult amphibious landing under heavy fire. The speed of the Navajo code had a direct operational impact. It allowed American forces to operate inside the enemy's decision-making cycle. By the time enemy intelligence could even register that a transmission had occurred, let alone try to decipher it, the action the message described was already underway. This created a tempo that the opposing forces simply could not match. They were constantly reacting to American moves rather than anticipating them. This shift in initiative, repeated across dozens of islands and campaigns, was a fundamental change in the tactical landscape of the Pacific War. The code talkers did not just send messages, they compressed time. And in doing so, they handed a critical advantage to the U.S. Marines. How much of the success attributed to bold leadership or superior tactics was actually enabled by this simple yet profound speed advantage. If a commander makes a brilliant decision, but the orders arrive too late, does it matter? Could modern digital communications, despite their technological sophistication, be more vulnerable to disruption than the simple human-based system of the code talkers? Number 13. What happens when a code is literally unbreakable? The primary goal of any military code is to be secure. But in the history of warfare, secure has always been a temporary state. Every code, every cipher is a puzzle waiting to be solved. Nations invest immense resources in creating codes and even more in breaking the codes of their enemies. Before the Navajo Code, the Pacific War was a constant cat and mouse game of cryptography. The US military would introduce a new cipher system and it would work for a while. But eventually, the enemy's skilled intelligence officers would find a weakness, capture a code book, or analyze enough traffic to discern a pattern. Once a code was broken, the consequences were catastrophic. It meant that every command, every piece of intelligence, every supply request was being read by the enemy. The Navajo Code was different. It was not a cipher or a substitution system that could be broken with mathematical analysis. It was a living language. To break the code, the enemy would first have to understand that they were listening to the Navajo language. This was the first hurdle. The sounds of Dain Bazad were so alien to Japanese ears that in early intelligence reports, they speculated it might be some kind B-level American code, or perhaps even a strange dialect of their own language. According to reports from the U.S. Navy's Radio Intelligence Unit, captured enemy documents contained confused references to the strange American radio jargon they couldn't penetrate. Let's assume the enemy figured out it was a Native American language. Their next step would be to find someone who could speak it. Here, the sheer isolation of the Navajo language provided the ultimate security. At the outbreak of the war, it is estimated that fewer than 30 non-Navajo people in the world could speak the language fluently. None of them were in a position to help the opposing forces. The enemy had successfully used Japanese Americans' Nisei to translate captured documents and interrogate prisoners, but they had no equivalent for the Navajo language. There was no Navajo Japanese dictionary. There were no language schools they could send their spies to. Even if by some miracle they had captured a Navajo speaker who was not a code talker, they would have been met with another layer of security. The code talkers did not just speak plain Navajo. The original 29 had developed a specialized dictionary of over 200 terms for military concepts. The Navajo word for turtle, chai degahi, became tank. Iron, fish, besh, lo meant submarine. Hummingbird, dihitihi, was fighter plane. A bomber was a buzzard J-show. This meant that a regular Navajo speaker would have been baffled by a military transmission. They might hear a string of words about turtles, hummingbirds, and potatoes, and have no idea it was a detailed order for a combined arms assault. On top of this, for spelling out names or places that weren't in the coded dictionary, they developed a phonetic alphabet. They assigned an English word to each letter of the alphabet and then used the Navajo word for that English word. For example, for the letter A, they used the word aunt, which in Navajo is Wolachi. For B, they used bear, in Navajo shush. So to spell the name Saipan, a code talker would transmit the Navajo words for sheep, ant, ice, pig, ant, nettle. This multi-layered system made the code exponentially more difficult to comprehend. The enemy never broke the code. This is not an exaggeration or a morale-boosting claim. It is a historical fact confirmed by U.S. intelligence and post-war analysis of enemy documents. Major Howard Connor, the 5th Marine Division signal officer at Iwo Jima, stated unequivocally, Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. This confidence was only possible because he knew his communications were completely secure. Commanders could speak with a freedom and clarity that was previously unthinkable. They did not have to worry that their plans were being overheard. This absolute security meant they could be more daring, more coordinated, and more effective. It removed a massive element of uncertainty and friction from the chaos of war, giving American forces a hidden advantage that the enemy could not counter because they never truly understood what it was. What psychological toll did it take on enemy intelligence officers to be faced with a constant stream of crucial yet utterly incomprehensible information? If the code had been based on a more common language like Spanish or German, how long would it have taken to be broken? Does the story of the Navajo Code suggest that the most effective security systems are often the simplest and most human, rather than the most technologically complex? Number 12. How do you say submarine when your language has no word for it? The genius of the Navajo Code was not just in using the language, but in how it was adapted for modern warfare. The Navajo language, Dain-Bazad, was ancient and descriptive, deeply connected to the natural world of the American Southwest. It had rich, detailed words for different types of rain, for the landscape, for family and ceremony. What it did not have were words for battleship, machine gun, dive bomber, or coordinator. The task facing the original 29 Navajo recruits in the spring and summer of 1942 was to build a bridge between their ancient tongue and the brutal technological reality of 20th century combat. They had to create a new vocabulary, a military dictionary. This process was a remarkable exercise in creativity and metaphorical thinking. They did not simply invent new sounds or adopt English words. Instead, they looked at the machines and concepts of war and described them using the world they knew. They used a form of descriptive analogy. A submarine which moves silently under the water became beshlo, the Navajo word for iron fish. A battleship, the largest ship in the fleet, was called loso, or whale. A destroyer, smaller and faster, was salo, or shark. The air was filled with new birds. A fighter plane fast and agile was dahi-ti-hi, a hummingbird. A dive bomber, which swooped down on its prey, was Jinny, or chicken hawk. A larger bomber was Jay-Sho, a buzzard. A transport plane was Atsa, an eagle. The weapons of war were also given new names. A machine gun with its rapid chattering sound was called Bialdotso Lani, meaning many big guns. A mortar was Bialdotso Desani, or short big gun. Hand grenades were Nimasi, the Navajo word for potatoes. This system was brilliant for several reasons. First, it was intuitive for the code talkers. The metaphorical links made the new vocabulary easy to memorize and recall under pressure. They did not have to consult a code book. The image of a chicken hawk diving was a powerful mnemonic for a dive bomber. Second, it added yet another layer of security. As mentioned before, even if an enemy cryptographer managed to translate the literal Navajo words, they would be left with a nonsensical message about whales, potatoes, and hummingbirds. The meaning was completely opaque without understanding the underlying metaphorical system. The code consisted of over 400 such terms by the end of the war, covering everything from military ranks and geographical features to different types of munitions. The code talkers themselves were responsible for this linguistic innovation. Men like Chester Nez and Carl Gorman, both members of the original 29, have described in their memoirs the long sessions at Camp Pendleton where they would sit together brainstorming these terms. A Marine officer would show them a piece of equipment and they would discuss among themselves what to call it in their language. In a organic process, in addition to the dictionary of specific terms, they also created the phonetic alphabet for words that had no equivalent, as previously discussed. This dual system gave the code incredible flexibility. They could transmit complex technical orders using their specialized dictionary and then seamlessly switch to the phonetic alphabet to spell out a specific map grid, a person's name, or a new piece of enemy equipment they hadn't encountered before. The code was not static. It was a living, evolving system that the code talkers could adapt on the fly. This ability to innovate, to take an ancient language and mold it into a precise tool for modern communication was a core reason for its enduring success on the battlefield. How did the act of creating these new words change the Navajo language itself, even if only for a small group of its speakers? Did the code talkers ever disagree on the right metaphorical word for a piece of military hardware? What does this process of linguistic creation tell us about the human brain's ability to adapt and find meaning through metaphor, even under the most extreme circumstances? Number 11, can a perfectly clear message prevent friendly fire? In the chaos of a battlefield, confusion is as dangerous as the enemy. Friendly fire, the tragic event of one's own forces firing on each other, is a constant and devastating risk. It often happens because of unclear communication, mistaken identity, or delays in transmitting information. A unit moves faster than expected, a map coordinate is misread, or a message is garbled by poor radio reception or slow decryption. The consequences are always horrific, leading to loss of life and a deep blow to morale. The Navajo Code played a crucial, though often overlooked, role in significantly reducing these incidents. The key was its combination of speed and perfect accuracy. The Navajo language is incredibly precise, and its complex grammar and tonal nature mean that small changes in pronunciation can drastically alter the meaning of a word. The code talkers were trained to speak with absolute clarity. Because they were native speakers communicating with other native speakers, there was virtually no room for misinterpretation. An English message, when relayed through multiple people or over a crackling radio, can easily become distorted. A grid 1 to 5 can sound like a grid 9 to 5, but a message sent in Navajo was heard and understood with an accuracy rate that was, for all intents and purposes, 100%. Chester Nez, one of the original 29 code talkers, recounted in his book Code Talker how meticulous their training was. They drilled relentlessly, not just on the code words, but on clear enunciation and calm delivery, even in simulated combat with explosions and machine gun fire happening all around them. They had to be perfect because they knew a single mistake could have lethal consequences. This pursuit of perfection paid off. Marine Corps records show that during the entire course of the war, the code talkers transmitted thousands upon thousands of messages, from simple supply requests to complex fire missions, without a single recorded error in translation. This level of accuracy was a lifeline for troops on the front line. Consider an artillery strike. A forward observer spots an enemy position and calls in the coordinates for an artillery barrage. If that coordinate is off by even a small amount, or if the number is misheard by the receiving operator, the shells could land on friendly troops. The Navajo Code eliminated this risk. The code talker with the forward observer would transmit the grid coordinates with perfect clarity. The code talker at the artillery battery would receive them and repeat them back for confirmation instantly. The entire exchange was secure, instantaneous, and error-free. This ability was particularly vital during amphibious landings, which were some of the most chaotic and complex operations of the war. While multiple units were landing on a beach, air support was flying overhead, and naval ships were firing from the sea. Coordinating all these elements was a communications nightmare. The code talkers acted as the central nervous system of these operations. They could relay real-time information about the location of friendly units, ensuring that naval gunfire and airstrikes were directed precisely at the enemy and not at the Marines fighting their way up the beach. In his extensive research for the book, The Navajo Code Talkers, historian Doris Paul documented numerous interviews with Marine officers who commanded units in the Pacific. A recurring theme in these interviews was the absolute trust they placed in the information coming through the Navajo net. When a message came from the code talkers, they knew it was secure and they knew it was right. This confidence allowed them to make bold decisions and maneuver their troops more aggressively, knowing they had a reliable and error-free line of communication to coordinate with supporting arms. By eliminating the errors and delays that so often lead to friendly fire, the Navajo Code did more than just transmit information. It created a shield of clarity that protected American lives. How many instances of potential friendly fire were averted that we can never know about, simply because the message went through the Navajo net correctly the first time? Did the inherent precision of the Navajo language make the code talkers more meticulous communicators in general, even when speaking English? Could the zero-error record of the code talkers serve as a model for designing modern communication systems where accuracy is a matter of life and death? Number 10 was the battle for Iwo Jima, won with Navajo words. The Battle of Iwo Jima, which began on February 19th, 1945, is one of the most famous and hard-fought battles in the history of the U.S. Marine Corps. It was a brutal, month-long struggle for a tiny volcanic island that was strategically vital as an emergency landing site for American bombers. Communications during this battle were more critical than ever. The fighting was at close quarters, the terrain was a labyrinth of volcanic rock and enemy tunnels, and coordinating the movements of tens of thousands of Marines was a monumental task. It was here in this intense environment that the Navajo Code Talkers had their finest hour. 6 Navajo Code Talkers working in teams of 2 landed with the first waves of the 5th Marine Division. Their names were Corporal Willard Oliver, Private First Class Tony Begay, Private First Class Samuel Begay, Private First Class Samuel Morgan, Private First Class George Kirk, and Private First Class Joe Morris. They landed amidst chaos and immediately went to work. They set up the radios in shell craters and foxholes, often under direct enemy fire. Their job was to act as the primary communication link, sending information from the frontline units back to the command ships and coordinating air and naval support. During the first 48 hours of the battle, a period when the fighting was at its most intense and the outcome was far from certain, these 6 men worked around the clock. They handled a staggering volume of traffic. According to the official report by the 5th Marine Division's signal officer, Major Howard Connor, the Navajo Net transmitted and received over 800 messages during this 2-day period. Not a single one was misinterpreted. Every message calling for more ammunition, directing tank movements, identifying enemy strongpoints, guiding artillery fire, reporting casualties was sent with perfect speed and accuracy. Major Connor's assessment, written in the aftermath of the battle, has become one of the most powerful testaments to the Code Talkers' contribution. He wrote, "The entire operation was directed by Navajo Code. They sent and received over 800 messages without an error. Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima." This is not a casual compliment. It is a direct statement from a senior officer on the ground attributing the success of a pivotal operation to the work of the Code Talkers. He saw firsthand how the conventional coding systems were failing under the strain of battle, being too slow and cumbersome. The Navajo Code, in contrast, was fluid and efficient. The Code Talkers were central to almost every major tactical decision on the island. They coordinated the artillery barrages that slowly wore down the enemy's defenses on Mount Surabaki. They guided tanks through treacherous terrain to attack fortified pillboxes. When one Marine unit was pinned down and in danger of being cut off, it was a Code Talker who relayed their exact position and called in the airstrike that broke the enemy attack. Their work was not done from a safe command post miles away. They were right there in the heart of the fight. Samuel Bill Toledo, a Code Talker who served in other battles, often spoke of the immense pressure. He described having to transmit messages while lying flat on his stomach as bullets and shrapnel flew overhead. The security of their transmissions was absolute. The enemy was listening to every radio frequency, but the stream of Navajo words was completely meaningless to them. This allowed Marine commanders to communicate their plans openly and in detail, something they could never have done with a code the enemy might have been able to break. They could coordinate complex flanking maneuvers and concentrate their forces on weak points without tipping off their opponent. The seamless flow of information provided by the Code Talkers gave the Marines a level of tactical agility that was a decisive factor in the battle's outcome. The victory at Iwo Jima was paid for with immense courage and sacrifice, but that courage was directed and made effective by the clear, secure, and rapid communication provided by the Navajo Code Talkers. Without the 800 error-free messages in the first 48 hours, would the beachhead at Iwo Jima have held? How many more lives would have been lost if commanders had been forced to rely on the slower, less secure machine ciphers? Beyond the famous flag raising, why is this critical communications aspect of the Iwo Jima story still so little known by the general public? Number 9. How did a secret weapon operate in plain sight? The Navajo Code Talkers were a secret weapon, but they did not operate from a hidden bunker or a remote facility. They were frontline Marines serving in the open, right alongside the infantrymen they supported. This created a unique challenge how to maintain the secrecy of the code while its operators were in plain sight of thousands of other soldiers. The answer lay in a combination of rigorous discipline, clever cover stories, and the inherent cultural isolation that, in a strange way, protected the Navajo men. From the very beginning of their training, the Code Talkers were drilled on the importance of secrecy. They were told that the code was their primary responsibility, more important than their own lives. They were not to speak of it to anyone, not even other Marines in their own unit. They could not write down any part of the code. The dictionary they created was memorized. It never existed as a physical book that could be captured. This mental discipline was the first line of defense. The code lived only in the minds of about 400 highly trained men. On the battlefield, a code talker was just another Marine. He wore the same uniform, carried the same M1 rifle, and ate the same rations. Officially, his military occupational specialty was communications, the same as any other radio operator. To the average soldier, the code talker was simply a radio man who happened to be Navajo. When he spoke into his handset, the other Marines around him would just hear a string of what they assumed was his native language. Most had no idea they were witnessing the transmission of a top-secret military code. They simply knew that when their Indian radio man got on the horn, things happened, artillery arrived, air support appeared, and problems got solved. This lack of awareness among their fellow soldiers was a crucial element of the program's security. The less people knew, the less chance there was of an accidental leak. Some code talkers later recounted humorous stories of fellow Marines asking them to say something in that Indian talk for entertainment, having no clue about the vital importance of the words being spoken. The code talkers would oblige with a simple phrase, keeping the true nature of their work hidden behind a veil of cultural curiosity. The Marine Corps also understood the risk of a code talker being captured. The fear was that an enemy interrogator might force a code talker to reveal the secrets of the code. According to some accounts, though never officially confirmed in writing, code talkers were assigned bodyguards in some situations. These bodyguards were other Marines with a grim, unspoken duty. If their code talker was in imminent danger of being captured, they were to protect the code at all costs. The implication was clear. Many code talkers, like Chester Nez, dismissed these stories, stating they were never assigned a bodyguard and were expected to defend themselves like any other Marine. Regardless, the very existence of these rumors highlights how seriously the military took the security of the program. The language itself provided the final layer of operational security. Even if someone overheard a transmission, the sounds were so unique that they were difficult to remember or repeat accurately. This wasn't like overhearing a conversation in Spanish or French, where a non-speaker might still pick out a few recognizable words or phrases. Daini Bazad was, to an outsider, a seamless flow of unfamiliar tones and sounds. This inherent otherness of the language made it incredibly resilient to casual eavesdropping or battlefield intelligence gathering. The secret weapon could therefore be deployed on every front, in the most chaotic conditions, without its true nature ever being compromised. It was a secret hidden in the open, protected by the discipline of its users and the profound uniqueness of their native tongue. How did the code talkers handle the psychological burden of carrying a secret of such magnitude while living and fighting alongside men they could not confide in? What measures, if any, were in place to prevent a code talker from being mistaken for an enemy soldier by his own side, given the racial prejudices of the era? Did the very secrecy that made them effective also contribute to the lack of recognition they received for decades after the war? Number 8, did the code give commanders a secret line to victory? A military commander is, at their core, a decision maker, and the quality of their decisions is almost entirely dependent on the quality and timeliness of the information they receive. In the Pacific War, commanders were constantly grappling with the fog of war, the uncertainty, confusion, and incomplete intelligence that makes planning and executing operations so difficult. The Navajo Code acted like a searchlight, cutting through that fog and giving commanders a clear, real-time channel to their troops and to each other. This created a level of command confidence that was a powerful, if intangible, force multiplier. Before the code talkers, commanders had to be cautious with their radio communications. They had to assume the enemy was listening and might decipher their messages. This meant they often had to use vague language, rely on prearranged plans that might not fit the changing situation, or use slow, cumbersome encryption methods. This created a hesitant, reactive style of command. A commander might see an opportunity, but by the time he could securely communicate the orders to exploit it, the opportunity might be gone. The Navajo Code changed this dynamic completely. With a code talker by his side, a commander could speak his mind. He could issue complex orders, ask for detailed situation reports, and coordinate maneuvers with a degree of specificity and freedom that was previously impossible. He knew with absolute certainty that his message would be understood perfectly by the recipient and not at all by the enemy. This certainty was liberating. It fostered a more aggressive, proactive, and flexible command style. Imagine a regimental commander during the assault on Saipan in 1944. His battalions are spread out across a wide front, encountering varied levels of resistance. Through his code talker, he can get instant detailed updates from each battalion commander. Battalion A is pinned down by machine gun fire from a cave on Hill 721. Battalion B has found a gap in the enemy's line and is advancing rapidly. Battalion C needs immediate resupply of mortar ammunition. With this clear real-time picture of the battlefield, the commander can make immediate decisions. He can direct artillery to target the cave on Hill 721, order Battalion A to provide covering fire while another unit flanks the position, and tell Battalion B to exploit their breakthrough while ensuring their flanks are secure. This is precisely what happened. General Alexander Vandegrift, Commandant of the Marine Corps, was a strong supporter of the program. He saw firsthand on Guadalcanal how the code talkers allowed his commanders to adapt to the fluid, unpredictable nature of jungle warfare. In official commendations after the war, commanders repeatedly praised the confidence the code gave them. It wasn't just about sending messages, it was about creating a shared, secure understanding of the battlefield across all levels of command. This secret line also extended beyond the immediate battlefield. Code talkers served on command ships, linking the admirals planning the grand strategy with the colonels and captains executing it on the beaches. They served in rear area headquarters, coordinating the massive logistical effort required to supply the fighting forces. The code became the backbone of Marine Corps communications in the Pacific, a reliable and secure network that connected every echelon of the command structure. This ability to communicate with complete confidence, from the highest levels of command down to the frontline platoon, allowed the Marines to operate with a unity of effort and a speed of execution that consistently surprised and overwhelmed their opponents. How did this new level of communication clarity change the nature of military leadership itself? Did commanders become more willing to take calculated risks because they had better information? What was the psychological effect on a junior officer, knowing he had an instant secure line to his commander to ask for support or report a sudden threat? Number 7. Could a handful of men coordinate an entire invasion? An amphibious invasion is one of the most complex military operations imaginable. It involves thousands of soldiers, dozens of ships, and hundreds of aircraft, all needing to be synchronized with split-second timing. The initial hours are the most critical. If the landing forces cannot establish a secure beachhead and get organized quickly, the entire operation can fail. In this high-stakes environment, communication is everything. During the major island hopping campaigns in the Pacific, like the invasion of Saipan in June 1944, the Navajo code talkers were not just a part of this communication network, they were its vital center. The invasion of Saipan was a massive undertaking. Over 70,000 U.S. troops were set to land on an island defended by a determined enemy force of 30,000. The coordination required was immense. Naval ships had to bombard specific targets on the shore without hitting the incoming landing craft. The waves of landing craft themselves had to be directed to the correct beaches at the correct times. Once on shore, infantry units had to coordinate their advance, tanks had to be guided to support them, and air support had to be called in on enemy strongpoints. All of this had to happen under constant enemy fire. The Navajo code talkers were at the heart of this controlled chaos. They were in the command ships receiving and transmitting orders for the overall fleet. They were in the landing craft relaying last-minute instructions to the troops. And they were on the beaches with the first waves of Marines, establishing the crucial communication links between the frontline units and the command structure. A small group of men, perhaps a dozen on a specific beach, were responsible for coordinating the actions of thousands. For example, a company of Marines gets pinned down by fire from a series of pillboxes just off the beach. The company commander, unable to advance, gets on the radio to his code talker. The code talker transmits a request for naval gunfire, giving the precise coordinates of the pillboxes. The message goes to another code talker on a command ship. The order is relayed to a destroyer offshore. Within minutes, the destroyer's guns open fire, neutralizing the threat and allowing the Marines to move inland. This entire sequence, identifying a target, requesting support, and delivering that support, happened in a fraction of the time it would have taken with conventional encryption and with total security. Historian Jeffrey Dewart, in his book From Guadalcanal to Saipan, describes how the code talkers were essential for coordinating call fire missions, the process of calling in artillery or naval gunfire on a specific target. Their ability to transmit grid coordinates quickly and without error was a life-saving skill. During the Saipan campaign, they also played a key role in countering enemy armored attacks. When enemy tanks launched a major counterattack against the American beachhead, it was the code talkers who relayed the warnings and coordinated the response from American tanks and anti-tank guns, helping to blunt the assault. The small number of code talkers relative to the total force made their contribution even more remarkable. There were never more than a few hundred active code talkers in the Pacific at any one time, yet their impact was felt across entire divisions. They acted as communication nodes, linking disparate units that would have otherwise struggled to coordinate. They could talk to artillery units, tank battalions, and other infantry regiments, creating a cohesive and responsive fighting force from what could have easily devolved into a collection of isolated, confused units. The invasion of Saipan and other major landings like it was successful because of the bravery of the soldiers on the ground. But that bravery was made effective by the invisible linguistic web woven by a small, dedicated group of Navajo men. How did the code talkers manage the immense cognitive load of tracking multiple conversations and coordinating different types of military units simultaneously? What kind of specialized training did they receive to understand the tactics and needs of infantry, armor, and artillery? Could a modern military operation with all its digital technology be coordinated as effectively by such a small number of communicators? Number 6. What was the true cost of their silence after the war? When the war ended in 1945, the Navajo code talkers returned home not as celebrated heroes, but as keepers of a crucial national secret. The Marine Corps High Command knew that the code was a unique and powerful strategic asset. They believed it might be needed again in future conflicts. So upon their discharge, the code talkers were strictly ordered not to speak about their work to anyone. Not their parents, not their wives, not their children, not their tribal elders. They were to take the secret of the code to their graves. This enforced silence had a profound and lasting impact on the lives of these men. They had experienced the intensity of combat and had played a central role in some of the most important battles of the war. Like many veterans, they carried the psychological burdens of what they had seen and done. But unlike other veterans, they could not share their stories. They could not explain the source of their trauma or the nature of their service. They were denied the therapeutic release of talking about their experiences, a process that is now understood to be vital for mental health. They were isolated by the very secret that had made them so valuable. Returning to the Navajo Nation, they tried to resume their lives as shepherds, farmers, and community members. But the world had changed, and so had they. Many struggled with what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder, PSD. They suffered from nightmares, anxiety, and depression. In Navajo culture, there are traditional healing ceremonies, or sings, meant to restore balance and harmony to a person who has been exposed to negative or harmful experiences. These ceremonies often require the person to speak in detail about what happened to them. But the code talkers could not do this. Their vow of silence to the U.S. government conflicted directly with their own cultural and spiritual needs for healing. Their silence also meant they were denied recognition and benefits. While other veterans could proudly display their medals and were lauded for their service, the code talkers' contribution remained unknown. For decades, they were not eligible for certain veterans' benefits related to their specific service because the nature of that service was classified. Their own people often did not understand what they had done. Some were even viewed with suspicion, as they had been part of a military system that had historically oppressed their people. The secret was not declassified until 1968. It was only then that the world began to learn about the incredible story of the Navajo code talkers. But for over 20 years, these men lived in a silent, unacknowledged limbo. The first official recognition came in 1982 when President Ronald Reagan declared August 14th as National Navajo Code Talkers Day. But it wasn't until 2001 that the original 29 code talkers were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the nation's highest civilian honor. By that time, only a few of them were still alive to receive it. The other code talkers received the Congressional Silver Medal. The story of their post-war silence is a crucial part of their legacy. It speaks to their incredible discipline and loyalty. They kept their promise to a government that had not always kept its promises to them, but it also highlights a deep injustice. The men who had given the military its most powerful voice were themselves silenced for decades. The cost of their silence was paid in years of unacknowledged trauma, missed opportunities for healing, and a long-delayed recognition of their heroic and unique contribution to history. What would have happened if one code talker had decided he could not bear the silence and had broken his oath? How did the shared secret bond the code talkers to each other, creating a fraternity that no one else could ever join or understand? Does the government have a right to demand lifelong silence from its soldiers? And what is its responsibility to those soldiers when the secret is finally revealed? Number 5, how did the code connect the front lines to the command ships? Warfare in the Pacific was a multi-domain enterprise. It was a complex interplay between forces on the sea and the air and on the land. A successful operation required seamless coordination between the Marine infantry fighting on the islands, the Navy ships providing gunfire support and transport, and the air power, both Marine and Navy, that controlled the skies. This coordination was a massive communications challenge. Each branch had its own procedures, its own radio frequencies, and its own language. The Navajo code became the universal translator, the common linguistic thread that tied all these different elements together into a cohesive fighting force. A code talker on the front line was not just talking to other infantry units. His radio could connect him to a network that reached back to the command ships offshore. This link was a lifeline. A platoon pinned down by an enemy bunker could use their code talker to request naval gunfire support. The message would travel from the foxhole to the ship in seconds. The ship's gunnery officer, receiving the perfectly accurate coordinates, could then lay down a precise barrage of fire that would be impossible for a forward artillery unit to deliver. This ability to bring the immense firepower of the fleet to bear on a specific tactical target on the front line was a game changer. The code also integrated air power. A forward air controller, flying in a small spotter plane or embedded with a ground unit, would have a code talker with him. When he saw an enemy troop concentration or a line of tanks preparing to attack, he could instantly relay that information to the code talker. The message would be sent to the command ship or a nearby aircraft carrier. Fighter bombers would then be scrambled or diverted to the target. Again, the speed and security of the code meant that this could happen in near real time. The enemy had little to no warning before aircraft were on top of them. The book was a personal matter. Written by former code talker Thomas H. Begay, provides detailed accounts of this coordination. He describes being on the front lines and directing fire from battleships located miles out at sea. He acted as the eyes of the ship's captain, guiding the massive shells onto their targets with his words. This process, known as spotting, required absolute trust and perfect clarity, both of which the Navajo code provided. This inter-service communication was not limited to combat operations, it was also vital for logistics. Landing supplies on a contested beach, evacuating the wounded, and delivering reinforcements all required precise coordination between the land and sea components. The code talkers handled thousands of these logistical messages, ensuring that the right supplies got to the right place at the right time. They would guide landing craft through treacherous reefs and direct them to the safest parts of the beach, all while under fire. By creating this common secure language, the code talkers broke down the traditional communication barriers between different military branches. They allowed a Marine lieutenant in a jungle to, in effect, speak directly to a Navy captain on the bridge of his ship. This level of integrated communication was unprecedented at the time. It enabled the U.S. to fully leverage its naval and air superiority in direct support of the ground troops. The code talkers were the nexus, the central hub through which the full power of the American combined arms doctrine flowed. Did the different military branches have to adapt their own communication protocols to integrate with the Navajo net? How were the code talkers who served on ships or with air units trained in the specific needs and terminology of those branches? Can we draw a parallel between the code talkers acting as a universal translator for the military and the role that standardized data protocols play in modern network-centric warfare? Number 4, did their unique perspective offer more than just a code? The Navajo men who became code talkers brought more than just their language to the Marine Corps. They brought a unique cultural perspective and a set of skills honed by a life of resilience and adaptation. Growing up on the harsh but beautiful landscape of the Navajo Nation, they developed keen observational skills, a deep sense of direction, and an ability to remain calm and patient under difficult circumstances. These were not skills taught in boot camp, but they proved to be invaluable assets on the battlefield. Many code talkers were raised in traditional settings, living a life closely tied to the land. They were taught to read the weather, to track animals, and to navigate using the sun and stars. In the dense jungles of Guadalcanal or the confusing volcanic terrain of Iwo Jima, these skills were incredibly useful. Code talkers were often noted for their excellent sense of direction and their ability to find their way in unfamiliar environments. In his memoir, Chester Nez describes how his upbringing, which involved long hours herding sheep alone in the wilderness, prepared him for the isolation and sensory awareness required of a frontline soldier. Their cultural upbringing also instilled in them a remarkable level of mental fortitude. The Navajo value harmony, patience, and a calm demeanor. In the chaos and terror of combat, the code talkers were often described by their commanding officers as being exceptionally cool-headed. Their ability to calmly and clearly transmit messages while under intense fire was legendary. This was not just a matter of training, it was a reflection of a cultural mindset that emphasizes balance and composure in the face of adversity. This inner calm made them incredibly reliable communicators when reliability was needed most. Furthermore, their perspective as a people who had survived immense hardship and historical trauma gave them a profound resilience. They understood survival. This resilience manifested in their ability to adapt to the rigid and often culturally alien world of the military. They faced not only the enemy, but also, at times, racism and prejudice from their fellow soldiers. Yet, they performed their duties with unwavering professionalism and courage. Their commitment to their mission and to their comrades was absolute. There are also anecdotal accounts of code talkers using their unique skills in ways that went beyond their official duties. Some used their tracking skills to spot signs of enemy movement that other Marines might have missed. Others were able to orient themselves and their units after being lost in the jungle. While their primary role was always communication, their value as Marines was enhanced by the lifetime of experience they brought with them from Zaneta, the Navajo homeland. The military recruited them for their language, but they got so much more. They got men who were self-reliant, observant, patient, and incredibly resilient. The success of the Code Talker program was not just a linguistic triumph, it was a human one. It demonstrated that strength can be found in the most unexpected of places, and that cultural diversity, far from being a weakness, can be a source of unique and decisive capabilities. The Code Talkers did not just translate words, they translated a lifetime of cultural experience into battlefield effectiveness. How can a modern, technologically focused military better identify and utilize the unique soft skills that recruits from diverse cultural backgrounds bring with them? Did the Marine Corps ever attempt to formally study or incorporate the navigational or observational skills of the Code Talkers into its regular training? What other untapped human resources and cultural skills exist within diverse populations that could be crucial assets in times of national crisis? Number 3, could a language save thousands of lives? The ultimate measure of any military innovation is its impact on the outcome of battles and the preservation of life. By this measure, the Navajo Code was one of the most successful innovations in modern military history. Its direct contribution to saving the lives of American soldiers can be understood by looking at the 3 core benefits it provided: speed, accuracy, and security. Each of these elements directly translated into reduced casualties. First, speed. As discussed, the code allowed for near instantaneous communication. In combat, minutes and even seconds can mean the difference between life and death. A platoon that is about to walk into an enemy ambush can be warned in time to take cover or change its route. A wounded Marine can have a medic dispatched to his location immediately. A unit running low on ammunition can be resupplied before its position is overrun. By compressing the time it took to communicate, the code allowed American forces to react faster to threats and opportunities, preventing countless situations that would have resulted in casualties. Second, accuracy. The code's perfect error-free transmission record was a crucial life-saving feature. We've already touched on how it prevented friendly fire incidents, which are a tragic source of casualties in any war. But the accuracy had other implications as well. It meant that medical evacuation requests included the correct coordinates and the right information about the nature of the injuries. It meant that logistical requests were for the correct type and amount of supplies, preventing shortages of critical items like blood plasma or ammunition. Every error avoided was a potential life saved. The certainty that a message was 100% correct removed a dangerous element of guesswork from battlefield operations. Third, security. The unbreakable nature of the code meant that the enemy could not anticipate American movements. This element of surprise was a massive tactical advantage that saved lives on a grand scale. If the enemy knows where and when you are going to attack, they can prepare their defenses, set up ambushes, and pre-sight their mortars and artillery. This leads to significantly higher casualties for the attacking force. Because the Code Talkers' transmissions were secure, amphibious landings, troop movements, and offensive operations could be planned and executed without the enemy knowing the details in advance. The Marines were consistently able to achieve tactical surprise, catching the enemy off guard and unprepared. This directly resulted in lower casualties during the initial, most vulnerable stages of an assault. The cumulative effect of these three factors across the entire Pacific theater was immense. While it is impossible to calculate an exact number, it is safe to say that thousands of American lives were saved because of the work of the Navajo Code Talkers. Every artillery strike that landed perfectly on an enemy position instead of on friendly troops, every ambush that was avoided because of a timely warning, and every major attack that achieved surprise because of secure communications contributed to this total. Major Howard Connor's statement about Iwo Jima is telling. If the Marines could not have taken the island without the Navajos, one must consider what the alternative would have been. A prolonged battle with even higher casualties, or perhaps even a failed invasion, which would have had devastating strategic consequences and a staggering human cost. The Code Talkers did not fire the guns or fly the planes, but the words they spoke made it possible for those who did to be vastly more effective and to do their jobs more safely. Their language was a shield that protected the lives of their fellow soldiers. Is it possible to create a historical model to estimate the number of lives saved by the code by comparing casualty rates in battles where they were used versus similar battles where they were not? Beyond the battlefield, how many lives were saved by the logistical efficiency the code enabled, ensuring food, water, and medical supplies reached those in need? Does the life-saving impact of their work make the Code Talkers' story one of the most compelling arguments for strategic investment in non-technological, human-centered solutions? Number 2, how did they turn an ancient language into the ultimate modern weapon? The transformation of Dinabizad from a spoken, unwritten language into a sophisticated tool of modern warfare was a deliberate and brilliant process. It was not enough to simply speak Navajo over the radio. The language had to be weaponized, systematized, drilled, and integrated into the complex machinery of the U.S. Marine Corps. This process, led by the original 29 and the Marine Corps signals officers who supported them, turned a cultural treasure into a strategic asset. The first step was the creation of the lexicon, as we've discussed. This was the foundational act of weaponization. By creating specific, unambiguous terms for military hardware and concepts, the Code Talkers turned a descriptive language into a precise instrument. This dictionary was the software of the code, but like any software, it needed hardware and operators. The hardware was a standard military radio like the portable TBX transceiver. The operators were the Code Talkers themselves. The training was intense. The first recruits were not just tasked with creating the code, they had to prove they could use it under pressure. They underwent the same grueling boot camp as every other Marine at Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego. This was essential. It turned them from civilians into disciplined Marines, physically and mentally prepared for the rigors of combat. After boot camp, they went to Camp Elliott for specialized communications training. Here, they memorized the dictionary and the phonetic alphabet. They drilled constantly, sending and receiving messages until the code became second nature. They were timed and tested for speed and accuracy in chaotic, simulated combat environments. This training was crucial because the code had to be completely portable and self-contained. It had to exist only in the minds of the operators. There could be no written materials in the field. This reliance on human memory was a stark contrast to the machine-based cryptography of the time, which depended on cumbersome equipment and vulnerable codebooks. The human mind became the encryption engine. This made the system incredibly robust. A code talker could be dropped on a beach, swim to shore with his radio, and be transmitting securely within minutes. No setup time, no risk of captured equipment compromising the system. Integration was the final step in weaponizing the language. The code talkers had to be seamlessly integrated into the Marine Corps command and control structure. They were assigned to every level, from frontline platoons and companies up to regimental and divisional headquarters. This distribution created a comprehensive communications network. An officer at any level could access the Navajo net. They learned to work side by side with commanders, becoming their trusted voice on the battlefield. The Marine Corps, for its part, learned to trust the system implicitly. The speed, reliability, and security of the Navajo net became a known, dependable asset that commanders could build their battle plans around. The process of turning this language into a weapon was a perfect fusion of ancient culture and modern military doctrine. It took the inherent complexity of an ancient, isolated language and combined it with the discipline and systematic training of the U.S. Marines. The result was a communication system that was more advanced in its effectiveness than the most sophisticated technology of its day. It was organic, adaptable, and completely impenetrable. The language of the Navajo people, once suppressed by the very government that now sought its help, had become the sharpest edge of the Marine Corps sword in the Pacific. What specific linguistic features of Navajo, beyond its complexity, made it particularly well-suited for a military code? Were there debates or disagreements among the original 29 about the best way to structure the code or which words to use? How did the Marine Corps signals officers, with their background in conventional communications technology, adapt their thinking to manage and deploy this purely human-based system? Number one, what if the code had been broken? To truly understand the impact of the Navajo code talkers, we must consider the alternative. We must ask the unsettling question, what if the code had failed? What if the enemy had managed to break it? Or what if the program had never been created in the first place? The consequences would have been catastrophic and would have fundamentally altered the course of the war in the Pacific. If the U.S. Marines had been forced to rely on their existing machine ciphers, the tactical landscape would have looked vastly different. We know that enemy intelligence was highly proficient at breaking these codes. This means that in critical battles like Guadalcanal, Saipan, Palayu, and Iwo Jima, Marine commanders would have been operating with the constant fear that their plans were being read by the enemy. Every order to attack, every report on troop positions, every request for supplies would have been a potential intelligence gift to their opponents. The element of surprise, which the secure Navajo code so often provided, would have been lost. Instead of landing on beaches against an enemy who was unsure of the exact time and place of the assault, the Marines would have faced defenders who were fully prepared and waiting for them. The already high casualty rates of these amphibious assaults would have soared. Beachheads that were tenuously held might have been thrown back into the sea. Their battles that were won by a narrow margin could easily have been lost. The tempo of operations would have slowed to a crawl. The need to constantly change codes and the time-consuming nature of machine encryption would have introduced significant delays. The fluid, real-time command and control that the code talkers enabled would have been replaced by a slow, ponderous system. Commanders could not have adapted as quickly to changing battlefield conditions. The combined arms coordination between land, sea, and air forces would have been clunky and prone to error. This loss of tactical agility would have given a significant advantage to the defending forces. Friendly fire incidents would have undoubtedly increased. Without the perfect accuracy of the Navajo transmissions, mistakes in communicating grid coordinates for artillery and airstrikes would have been more frequent, leading to more tragic losses. Morale, both among commanders and frontline troops, would have suffered. The confidence that came from knowing you had a secure and reliable line of communication would have been replaced by uncertainty and doubt. Strategically, a longer, bloodier, and more difficult island-hopping campaign could have had far-reaching consequences. A higher casualty rate might have weakened the political will in the United States to see the war through to its conclusion. The timeline for the war in the Pacific could have been extended, costing not only more lives but also immense material resources. The failure to take a key island like Iwo Jima would have meant that damaged B-29 bombers would not have had a safe place to land, potentially leading to the loss of many more aircraft and their crews. The Navajo Code was, in military terms, a force multiplier. It made every Marine, every ship, and every plane more effective. Removing that multiplier would not have just been an inconvenience, it would have been a fundamental blow to the American war effort in the Pacific. The what if is a sobering thought. The security of the United States and the outcome of a global conflict rested, in no small part, on the minds and voices of a few hundred young Navajo men. Their success was not just a remarkable story, it was a pivotal factor in the history of the 20th century. If the enemy had captured a code talker and somehow forced him to cooperate, what would the strategic impact of that intelligence failure have been? How would the public's perception of the war have changed if the casualty figures from the Pacific campaign had been significantly higher? Ultimately, does the success of this one unique program suggest that the outcome of major historical events can hinge on small, seemingly improbable factors that no one could have predicted?